Jai Hind viewers, I am Sudhakar Dwivedi, Assistant Professor in Information Technology Department. And in today's class, I am going to discuss about a very important technology, that is a Servlet. And we will discuss today what is Servlet, what is a website, what is the web application, and what is actually a static web application and dynamic web applications, and how we can manage the request and responses on the web servers. So in today's class, we will discuss about these terminologies. So Servlet, actually what is this technology, and what we will get by implementing this Servlet technology in due course. So why we need actually this server side extensions, or why we need this technology that is known as the Servlet. So we can say say that the server side extensions are nothing but it is the technology that are used to create the dynamic web pages. So this technology are actually used to create a dynamic web pages. That means if we want to create some dynamic web pages, so what is actually a dynamic web pages? The dynamic web page is a page that is created according to the user's request. That means the user has requested some pages, and then this pages is generated by according to the user's requests. So actually, to provide the facility of the dynamic web page, we require some server side extensions. So if we want to create a dynamic web page, that means that the page that is generated according to the user's input or the client's input, we require some components, some extensions that can be run on the server side, on the remote side, and that can able to generate the web pages according to the user's input. So actually, to provide the facility of the dynamic web pages need a container. So how we can generate this web page, this dynamic web page according to the user's input? So for that, we require a web container or the web service. Because the Servlet actually technology that is provided by the Java, that means Servlet is a Java programs actually. So we need three things to execute or deploy this server on the remote side. So first, because it's a Java program, so we need actually a Java development kit JDK to compile and run this Java program Servlet, and then we require a Servlet container or the server. Then we require a container or the web server to deploy this Servlet or to manage this Servlet or the request and responses. So once the Servlet, this server is running and the Servlet class is deployed on this web server, that means this web server is ready to take the responses from the user and then process that request on the server side or the remote side, and then get back to the client. So clients means we also need some client programs. So we need a client program to send the request and then to receive the responses. So to meet this requirement, independent web servers provide some solutions in the form of the APIs, application programming interfaces. So there are various types of the web servers available in the market, and we can use them according to our requirements. And these APIs allows us to build the programs that can run on the web servers. So by using these APIs or application programming interfaces, we can write a programs that can run actually on the web server, and that can create and they can able to create dynamic web pages. And in this case, the Java Servlet is also one of the component API of the Java Platform Enterprise Edition, which sets the standard for creating dynamic web applications in the Java. So if I am talking about the Java, so Java Servlet is also a component API. It is also a component API, and it is a Java Platform Enterprise Editions, right? So that sets the standard for creating the dynamic web pages, right? So by using this Java Servlet, we can create the dynamic web pages. So what is when I'm talking about the web applications, there are some types of the static web applications, some are the dynamic web applications. So what actually a web application? So web application is an application program that is usually stored on the remote server. So web applications is a program that is stored somewhere in the remote server, and and users can access it through the use of the software known as the web browser. So we have a client program as a web browser, and we have a web server where our application programs are stored. So we require some client programs and we require a server where our application or web applications are stored, and we need to request these resources from the web server. So we can see here it's a client program. The client programs requests for the web pages, and this request is transferred to the web server. Then this request is transferred to the web server. Then web server instruct the application server to process the page. So whenever this web server receives the request from the client, it instructs the server to process the page. So web server receives this request initiated by the clients, and then it instructs some program on the web server to create the web pages according to this request. Then the application server, this application server process the page and generates the output. So the request is came on the web server. Web server has instructed the application server to create the web pages. The application server process the page and generate the output, and then finally the web server sends output to the web browser, that means clients. So what we see here, the clients initiated the request. The request is goes to the server. The server has generated the web content. Web server has generated this web content, and then finally send a response to the client. So some of the web applications, as we have said earlier, some of the web applications are entirely static, due to which they do not require any type of the processing at the server, and some of the web pages are dynamic. That means we require some type of the processing to create that, to generate that web pages according to the user's input. So to operate a web application, to create this dynamic web page applications, we usually require a web server, as I have said. So we require a web server to manage the client's upcoming requests, and an application servers that can process the request and that can process the requests and generate the dynamic pages. So application server perform the task that requested by the clients, which also may need a database to store the information sometimes. So we can understand this servlet by these components. So Java servlet, now it is also known as the Jakarta servlet technology, works on the following architecture. So we can see we need 5 components here. So we need the HTTP server, we need a HTTP server, we need a HTTP client, a relational database, and client side program and server side programs. So we need these 5. So we need these 5 components, or these 5 components to create a dynamic web pages. So this is known as the typical 3-tier client server web database application architecture, consists of the 5 components here. So what is HTTP server? So first is HTTP server. We require HTTP server. It is also known as the web server. For example, HTTP, Apache HTTP server, Apache Tomcat server, Microsoft Internet Information Server, and so on. And second, we require the HTTP client. So we require a server to host the pages. We require the HTTP client to initiate the request, commonly known as the web browser, such as Firefox, Chrome, etc. We require relational databases such as MySQL, PostgreSQL, Oracle, and so on. We can see here we require a web server. So this web server handles the request initiated by the web client. That means the request is coming from the browser, and then the request is received by this web server, and then this request is transferred to the program that is running on the web server. So here are various servlet programs. We can see here are various servlet programs are running on the server side, on the remote side. So the work of the web server is to receive the request coming from the web browser, and then it transfer this request onto appropriate programs that is running on the server side, right? And this servlet now it may can access the relational databases according to requirement to create the dynamic web content, right? So we require HTTP server, HTTP client, and relational databases, and we require a client side programs. So on the client side, there is some client side programs are running through which users can create the request, or users can send the request to the web server. So client side program actually running inside the browser that sends request to the server and receives the server responses. So client side program can be written in many technologies like the HTML form, JavaScript, VB and others, through which the users can create the request and send the request to the web server, and then finally get the responses sent by the web server. And what is the server side program? Server side program that is running on the HTTP server that receives the process client's requests, that receives and process the client requests. The server side program extracts the the server side programs receives the request from the clients. So it extracts the query parameters submitted by the client programs and queries the databases. So when the client send requests and server receives these requests, so what servers do? The server side programs extract the query parameters from the requests sent by the client program, and then it queries the databases to prepare the responses. So server side program can also be understood as a technology or as an extension that receives the requests. It fetches or it extracted the parameters from this URL sent by the clients, and then it may queries from the databases to prepare the or to generate the dynamic web pages. Server side programs can also be written in many ways, like we are using here the Servlet. We can also use the JSP, JSF, ASP, PHP, Python, JavaScript and others. There are a lot of technologies through which we can create a server side extensions. So a typical use case of the web applications can be understood as following points. So what we'll first do, a client issues an URL to request and download an HTML page. So first the client issues a request, and this request may be in the form of the URL, and it may be a request to download an HTML page containing an HTML form through which the users can send his information to the server or send his the URL to the server to request some pages. And then client enters the requested data into this form and submit these query parameters back to the server side program for the processing. On other sides, on the server side program is running, and this server side program extract the query parameters from the request sent by the client and perform the database query, and finally returns the query results back to the requesting client. So first, client has initiated a request, and for this it may require an HTML form to send its data. Then server on the other sides receives these requests, and it extracts the query parameters, perform the database query and returns the query result back to the resulting client. And finally the client displays the query results and repeats these steps further for the another request response exchange. So what is actually a servlet? So servlets are primarily used to create a web application developed to handle a dynamic content generation. We can also use the servlets in the user authentication process, database interaction, managing the user sessions, and that's why it is ideal for use cases like the e-commerce website, online forums, login systems, shopping carts, dynamic content updates. We can create the personalized web pages, data-driven web applications, and any scenario where the server needs to process the user request and generate the customized responses according to the request received from the client. So essentially, we use the servlet in any situation where a web application needs to interact with a backend database, and wherever we need to create a dynamic web pages, after processing the request, these pages can be generated. So servlet technology is basically used to create for the web applications, and particularly for the dynamic web applications. Servlet is a Java technology for the server-side programming, and this technology is for the server-side programming. So servlets are the Java programs. So these servlets, what are the servlets? So servlets are basically the Java programs. So servlet is the Java programs that run on the Java enabled web server. So first we should understand that the servlets are the Java programs, and to run these Java programs we required a Java enabled web server or application server. So it is a Java programs, and if we want to run these Java programs on server sides, we require a Java enabled web server or a application server. And why these servlets are used? So servlets are used basically to handle the requests obtained from the web server. So what happens? The client's requests by the request parameter or from the URL, and this request goes to the web server, and then web server access the request initiated by the client and then transfer this request to a particular servlet. That means servlet is now used to handle the request obtained from the web server. So when the web server access the request from the client, then this web server transfer a particular request to a servlet running on the server, and this is used to handle a request obtained from the web server. Then the servlet process the request and produce the response, and then it produce the response, then send the response back into the web server. Servlet can also be understood as a class that extend the capabilities of the server and responds to the incoming requests that is coming from the client, and it can respond to any type of the request. So servlet is actually a web component that is deployed on the server. So servlet can also be understood as a web component that is deployed on the server side. For what? For creating a dynamic web pages. So servlet are basically used to create a dynamic web pages, and it's a web component that is deployed on the server side. So Java servlets are the programs that run on the web or the application server. So this is the programs that run on a web or application server. That means to host a servlet, we require a web server or a application server, and this web server or application server, and this web server act as a middle layer between the request coming from the web browser or the HTTP client and databases, right? So how we can work with these servlets? So execution of servlet involves the 6 basic steps. We can see here. In the first step, the client send the request to the web server. Then web server receives the request. Then the web server passes the request to the corresponding servlet, and then servlet process the request and generate the response in the form of the output. Then servlet sends the response back to the web server, and then web server send the response back to the client. So the execution of servlets require these 6 steps. As a first step, Firstly, the client sends a request to the web server. Then this request is received by the web server, and then finally the web server passes the request to the corresponding servlet to final process the request. Then servlet process the request and generate the response, and this response is then transferred to the web server, and then finally web server sends the response back to the client, and client browser displays this result onto the screen. See here in this diagram, this web browser first initiated a request, and then this request is received by the web server here, and then this request is transferred by the web server to a corresponding servlet to process the request. It may require a database also to create a particular page, right? And then this servlet process the request, it creates a dynamic web page, and then it transfer the response to the web server, and finally this web server transfer the response to the browser and displays on the client's browser screen. So how the servlet works, and before the servlets, how we are able to handle these server side extensions. So we usually use the CGI, Common Gateway Interface. So CGI was the first protocol or way of communication between the web server and a program. It passes the request from the web server to application program and receives data back to forward to the web user. And CGI technology enables the web server to call an external program and pass HTTP request information to the external program to process the request. But the CGI, Common Gateway Interface, to handle each request, it starts a new process. We can see here, to handle each request, it requires a new process. So to handle each request, it creates a new process that may be an overhead on the server side. So to handle these things, we require something that may not create a multiple process for the multiple requests, and Servlet is the solution for this problem actually. So the disadvantage of the CGI is the number of as the number of the client increases, it takes more time for sending the responses, because for each request it starts a process, and web server is limited to start the processes. That means web server can handle only a limited processes. So it may create a bottleneck on the server side. So to provide the solutions of this, we can use the servlet that uses the Java programs. Now, how the servlet actually works on the server side, we will discuss on the subsequent classes. Thank you so much.